I spent $35,000 on a trip that was supposed to prove I finally belonged in my own family. But at the airport, right there at the check-in counter, my sister turned to me, didn't even blink, and said, "I forgot your ticket. Go home." For a moment, the world just muted. Their laughter drifted through security while I stood there alone with a suitcase full of hopes I should have known better than to pack. That was the day they made it clear I wasn't part of them. 3 weeks later, when they came back from Europe sunburned and bragging about memories I paid for, they froze the moment they saw me standing next to a woman they never expected to see by my side because she was the one holding the power to end everything they thought they owned. And she already had. My name is Orion Hale, and this is the story of how being left behind became the moment I finally walked forward. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my voice resonates with you even just a little, I'd be grateful if you subscribed. It helps more people who've been overlooked, dismissed, or used feel less alone. I woke up at 4 in the morning in my apartment overlooking South Lake Union, the kind of place people assume comes from privilege, not the decades of grinding work I've done to survive my own family. I moved through the quiet space with a strange mix of anticipation and dread, checking passports, printing itineraries, confirming the business class seats and private tours I'd spent $35,000 on. $35,000 for 1 week, money that came out of my pocket because I still believed that maybe, just maybe, if I helped them build memories, I might finally be allowed inside the one thing I never truly had: a family. And it wasn't the first time. In the last 15 years, I had paid off their mortgage, $180,000. I covered Brielle's MBA tuition, $52,000. Bought Marina a new SUV when her old one gave out $45,000. I even injected capital into their flailing home renovation business, another $75,000. Every time they stumbled, I caught them, hoping one day they'd turn around and see me. But people rarely look down to see what they're stepping on. The Uber ride to the airport was cold and uneventful except for the heaviness in my chest I tried to ignore. Inside Terminal A, under fluorescent lights that always made everyone look a little washed out, I stood with my family as they scrolled their phones and barely glanced at me. Marina gave me a polite nod like she was greeting a distant acquaintance. Elias murmured a half-hearted morning, already drifting toward the security line. And Brielle, perfectly pressed blazer, fresh manicure eyes that never softened when they landed on me, avoided touching the passports I held out like they were mine alone to carry. At the check-in counter, as I passed the documents to the agent, Brielle tugged my sleeve and motioned me aside with a too careful smile. "Orion, I'm sorry, but I think I messed up." She spoke with the tone of someone pretending to apologize, her nails tapping her phone screen in a rehearsed rhythm. "I think I accidentally canceled your ticket when I was choosing meals last week. I don't know, something must have glitched." She didn't even bother manufacturing panic convincingly. The agent confirmed it without hesitation. The flight was full. No seats left, no upgrades, no reassignments. The next available flight would leave in 4 days. They would already be halfway through the trip I paid for. I felt the air thin as the truth settled in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. This was intention. And the sting of it dragged up another memory: me at 8 years old, sitting alone in a foster office, waiting for someone to pick me, praying not to be forgotten. Yet here I was again, all grown up, repeating the same lesson. They moved quickly after that. Marina sighed and said, "We really can't miss the hotel check-in, sweetheart. You understand?" Brielle gave me a brief hug that felt like brushing off lint. Elias didn't meet my eyes. They walked toward security as if nothing unusual had happened. Not one of them turned around. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Photos in the family group chat. Champagne in the lounge. Boarding passes. Brielle's caption, "Off we go." Off we. None of it included me. I swallowed whatever feeling was rising and typed back, "Go. Don't miss your flight." It was the first time in years I told them to leave without pretending I'd be fine. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop, scrolling through the family photo albums where I was always the one behind the camera or cropped out entirely. Then, as I went to close a browser tab, an old unopened email caught my eye. The subject line read, "Langford Rowe, please review closing docs." It was from Peregrine Financial, sent months ago. The attached folder contained a set of closing documents I had helped structure years back, plus a file I didn't remember ever creating. I clicked on it, a quiet instinct tightening in my spine. Why did I have this? And what was inside that someone hadn't wanted me to see until now? The question followed me into the night like a shadow that had been waiting for the right moment to step into the light. The next morning at Peregrine Financial, I sat at my desk surrounded by spreadsheets, contracts, and the soft hum of office printers, but my attention stayed locked on the Langford Rowe closing documents. The project had always been positioned as the Hale family's legacy development, but I had been the one to structure most of the financing when Marina begged for help 2 years earlier. I opened the files again, this time combing through every clause. Debt structure, investor hierarchy, distribution, waterfall standard, until I reached subsection 18.4b. I remembered adding it at Harlan's request back when his health was deteriorating and he feared mismanagement after he was gone. The clause functioned like a trapdoor. If any managing partner breached fiduciary duty, their entire share automatically transferred to the largest individual investor. I had written it. I had forgotten it. Somehow, I was now the largest investor. I scrolled through the vendor payments and immediately noticed irregularities: 3 transfers to companies I didn't recognize, all with P.O. box addresses in Arizona. Shell companies, fake vendors. And one of the signatures on the approval forms was Brielle's. Or rather, a shaky imitation of her signature, close enough to pass, not close enough to fool me. A weight settled in my stomach. Someone in my family was stealing from the project I had poured 7 figures into, and they had counted on me, never looking closely. They had been right until now. I called Raina, my closest friend, and an investigative reporter who had pulled me out of more than one dark corner. I sent her the suspicious transfers and asked her to dig through public records. While she worked, I accessed archived bank statements and old emails tied to the project, piecing together a timeline like a surgeon tracing an infection. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the project wasn't merely mismanaged, it was bleeding money through channels someone had engineered deliberately. My phone rang. "Brielle, Mom says you need to be at the launch event next week," she said, voice sharp and rehearsed. "People want to see the family united." "I'm not going," I said. There was a pause before she replied, quieter but threatening. "If you don't show, we'll have to explain why. And trust me, you won't like the version they hear." The call ended. My pulse didn't. 5 minutes later, another call came through unknown number. "This is Orion," I answered. A calm, measured female voice responded. "Mr. Hale, this is Vivian Crest from Crest Dominion. I believe we need to talk. I'm aware of your involvement in Langford Rowe's structure, and I think you'll find what I know." Clarifying. She invited me to meet her at the Fairmont Olympic, her tone cool and confident, the kind of tone people only use when they hold the better cards. When the call ended, I stared at the folder on my screen labeled Langford Rowe Suspicious Payments. I enlarged the forged signature. Brielle's name bent into an imitation of itself, and felt the betrayal settle like a stone behind my ribs. Before I could pack up, a company-wide alert flashed at the top of my screen. Major investor pulling out, urgent board call. Langford Rowe was in freefall. 10 days until collapse. My family had left me behind at the airport. They had no idea I was about to stop letting them walk away without consequences. The Fairmont Olympic Lounge looked like a different world from the fluorescent glare of the airport check-in. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city, and the coffee tasted like luxury and consequence. Vivian Crest had the kind of presence that folded a room into a neat, manageable problem. She wore a coat that cost more than my first apartment, and spoke in sentences that always landed exactly where they were supposed to. When she studied me, I felt less exposed and more like an object she was appraising for usefulness. She didn't waste pleasantries. "Crest Dominion has been watching Langford Rowe," she said, sliding a thin folder toward me. "Your main investor is pulling out because of leaks. If the scandal goes public, the asset will crater. I can either watch it burn and buy scraps, or I can step in and stabilize it." She named the 2 outcomes without shame. One was ruin and resale. The other was an intervention with conditions. The conditions were simple and brutal. Crest would purchase the outstanding debt, shore up financing, and take control of governance, but only if Vivian had veto power over management decisions. She needed someone inside to sign paperwork, to be the face who could make the right moves when investors demanded answers. She wanted me. She offered me a deal I wanted and hated. 25 to 30% equity or a named partner seat in the new structure, enough to make my financial future secure and give me leverage I'd never had. But she wasn't offering a charity. She wanted authority and proof that I could act. "You're the one who understands the structure," she said. "You built it. You can guide this transition, or you can watch them sell the family name at auction." Sitting there, I felt the weight of everything I'd spent to prop them up. I thought of the mortgage I paid to keep the house, the tuition check for Brielle, the capital I pushed into their business when it teetered. I remembered standing at the airport with my passport in my hand and their backs turned. The choice Vivian presented was simple on paper and jagged in the heart: step in and help heal the mess, or let them burn and reap the gain. I told her I needed time, and she smiled like someone who expected an answer. As I gathered the documents to leave, she paused and said almost conversationally, "There's another clause people tend to forget. Your father Harlan added a provision for exactly this sort of thing. If a managing partner is found to have breached fiduciary duty, the offending share goes to the largest individual investor." I'd drafted clauses, redlined contracts, and slept with numbers in my head, but I hadn't thought about that one in years. I opened the file she left and found the language subsection 18.4b buried under boilerplate. I'd helped draft it at Harlan's insistence, a quiet protection he'd asked me to include when he worried about what would happen if people he trusted turned. I felt my stomach drop when the logic arrived: the largest individual investor would inherit the miscreant's share. I'd put $7 million into Langford Row 2 years earlier, quietly, because Harlan had begged me to secure the project's future. No one knew about that investment. No one expected it. If the clause applied, the ownership chain tilted in a way that would pull everything toward me. I told Vivian exactly that, and she nodded like someone who had been waiting for me to realize it. "That changes the calculus," she said. "If you can play this right, you don't just salvage the project, you lead it." I felt a surge of vindication and a sharper ache beneath it. This power came at the cost of making legal moves against my family. I wasn't naive enough to think of it as revenge. It was leverage, and leverage requires brutality. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. A text from Brielle appeared on the screen. "You'll regret siding with outsiders." The message wasn't even subtle anymore. Before I could reply, an alert from Peregrine's legal department popped up on my work email: urgent, freeze access to escrow account, possible breach. My screen filled with a notice that my access to certain accounts had been restricted pending review. The room seemed to narrow. Someone inside the orbit of Langford Row had moved first to cut me out of the controls I needed to activate any of this. I walked out of the hotel, feeling the world close in at both ends: the possibility of finally having power and the aggressive, immediate effort to strip any authority away. Time was compressing. The game had just gotten real. That night, the city lights painted the glass of my apartment in shifting bars of color, and I sat with backups open in multiple windows. Offline ledgers, archived bank statements, time-stamped emails, because I've always been the kind of person who prepares for the moment something breaks. Someone had already initiated a legal move, a request to restrict my access to the escrow account. Whoever did it wanted to slow me down to buy the breathing room to cover tracks. I had copies. I always kept copies. Working through the offline records, I traced another shell company, Desert Front LLC, linked to an account in Arizona. The payment trail combined small sums into a series of transfers that together added up to a significant leak. I followed the signature lines and the authorized approvers and felt my throat tighten when a name surfaced. A man I recognized from Marina's older files, an advisor who had appeared on grant proposals and municipal meeting minutes years ago. He shouldn't have been here, but the paper trail put him in the center of the money flow. You don't want to realize the woman who raised you might be using other people to siphon from the work you thought you were protecting. Pain is a private thing until it gets mapped on a ledger. I called Raina and sent her everything I had. She promised a deeper sweep and said she'd get back in 24 hours. The idea that the theft could reach beyond Brielle and involve Marina felt like a knife, but I couldn't act on emotion. I had to build a case. When I stepped into Peregrine later that morning, the legal team was waiting with their polite intercom language and formal letters. The Hale family has filed a request to limit your involvement on the basis that you no longer hold an operational role, the attorney told me, voice even. The move was bureaucratic and brutal, a preemptive strike that could freeze my ability to exercise the protections I'd just remembered. Then Elias called. His voice trembled in a way it hadn't during childhood arguments. "I can't go up against them," he said. "But you should know there's a meeting with investors in 2 days. They're preparing a narrative to deny everything." He sounded like someone finally willing to whisper the truth, but not yet ready to shout it. Elias had been a spectator for years. His call felt like a door opening a crack. He promised to be there in a small way, a name in the minutes, a witness who might tilt a vote. It was more than I had when I was younger. I walked down to the Hale house on a whim that felt dangerous. Marina answered the door in a tailored sweater and a mask of calm. Her living room smelled faintly of citrus and old money. She greeted me with that practiced warmth people use to fold strangers into a comfortable story. "Orion, what a surprise." Her fingers brushed my arm in the kind of touch that taught you to count your boundaries. I didn't soften. "I'm here because the project is being gutted," I said. I watched the micro-expressions pass across her face, the tilt of her mouth, the flash in her eyes. "I have paperwork that shows suspicious vendor payments. I want to know what your role is." She inhaled like she was reminded of a rehearsal line. "You should understand your position, Orion. We took you in. We gave you a name. There's a way families protect their own." The gratitude card used and folded was out on the table. I told her calmly that being given a roof had never meant being a wallet, and that if there were misappropriations, they would be exposed. Marina's posture shifted as if someone pushed a different emotion onto the stage. Suddenly, her tone softened in a way that felt rehearsed and offered disguised as concern. "Stand with us, child. We'll make sure your future is secure. Don't let outsiders drag us through the mud." Her voice was syrup. It was a bribe that tried to sound like maternal fear. I knew then she was buying time. Back in my apartment that night, my phone buzzed with a different kind of message. Rena's name lit the screen. "Orion, you need to see this now." The man tied to Desert Front was documented as the manager of a discretionary fund Marina oversaw when she was on the Commerce Commission. This isn't bookkeeping, it's a pattern tied to public funds. This is federal level. The file attached showed meeting minutes, a faded memo with Marina's initials, and a ledger entry tying the fund manager to the exact P.O. box the shell company used. The room narrowed until it was just the 3 things I could see: the ledger, the memo, my own reflection in the black glass of the monitor. Someone had taken more than money from the project. They'd been exploiting institutional access for years. And they'd done it under my family's name. It was the kind of discovery that accelerates the stakes on its own. The freeze on my escrow accessed the board meeting they were scheduling to deny wrongdoing, the list of names that meant anyone could be implicated. All of it compressed into a line of choices I had to make quickly. I wasn't a kid in a foster office anymore. I had documents, allies, and a clause Harlan had tucked away like an insurance policy. I also had a brother who might finally stand up, and a reporter who could burn through denials. Reyna said she would publish a preliminary inquiry if things escalated, and Elias texted that he would be at the investor meeting at least as a witness. I opened the file Reyna sent and stopped. The next move would have to be surgical. I sat with that for a long time, listening to the city breathe around me, and understood that the project wasn't just about property or profit anymore. It was about whether the name on our house meant something truthful or nothing at all. Vivian's office felt colder than usual the next morning, though the sun had just begun streaming through the tall windows overlooking downtown. Hiroshi Crest Dominion's financial strategist had already spread Reyna's report across the table by the time I walked in. Flowcharts, redlined ledgers, and annotated printouts formed a map of rot that reached far deeper than any of us expected. Hiroshi tapped his pen against a cluster of arrows circling 3 bank accounts. "This isn't 3.7 million, he said. "If we follow the older transfers, the losses reach 6, possibly 8 million. And notice the pattern: the accounts tie back to a discretionary fund Marina once controlled." Vivian turned to me with an expression that felt like a test. Are you prepared to confront her? Because if this is correct, she isn't a bystander. She designed this. Cass was just following instructions. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I'd spent years telling myself Marina's distance came from exhaustion or disappointment. Seeing her signature appear on transactions that funneled money into a fund she oversaw shattered that excuse. This is the first time I'm seeing who she really is, I finally said. Jonathan Pierce arrived soon after carrying my copy of the Langford Rowe contract. While reviewing it, he stopped and frowned. Orion, there's a mandatory pre-launch independent review requiring the presence of the largest investor. Without you, the launch isn't legally valid. I stared at the clause, unable to believe I had missed it. Suddenly, everything snapped into place: the phone calls, the family's demand that I attend the event, their sudden concern for public unity. They didn't want reconciliation. They needed my signature. I told Vivian and Jonathan I was going to the internal investor meeting that afternoon. Elias had slipped me the schedule the night before, and even though he wasn't ready to take a side, he'd given me the one thing I needed most: a point of entry. The Hale Corporation's boardroom looked staged for a verdict when I walked in. Cass was standing by the projector mid-presentation while Marina sat poised beside him, hands folded, expression serene. Several investors turned at the sound of the door and whispered among themselves. Cass froze for a beat, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad you're here," he said tightly. "We were just clarifying that the rumors about accounting issues are unfounded." I stepped forward and placed a single printed page on the center of the table, then explained these transfers to Desert Front LLC. It's a P.O. box in Arizona. No employees, no contracts. Marina's voice sliced into the room. "You're sabotaging your own family." One of the investors leaned closer to the document. This wasn't disclosed. His tone had changed, edged with suspicion. Another investor, older, raised his hand. "Marina, is it true you've been negotiating with a Singapore fund to sell a portion of the project?" Marina stiffened. Cass shot her a glance that revealed more than any confession could. I felt a strange clarity settle in. They had been preparing to cut me out entirely, and this wasn't a last-minute impulse, it was a plan they had been building for months. I didn't reveal the full evidence. I didn't need to. I left just enough on the table to destabilize the story they were trying to control. As I exited the room, my phone vibrated with a message from Elias. "You did the right thing. I'm with you." For the first time, I felt the ground shifting beneath the family, and for the first time it wasn't shifting under me. My apartment felt small that night. Lights, low screens, open everywhere. I created a timeline of every suspicious transfer, every alias account, every shell company Reyna had identified. Patterns emerged that went back longer than Cass had been involved, pointing unmistakably toward Marina. Some transfers predated my $7 million investment. The theft had begun while Harlan was still alive. A new email appeared in my inbox. No sender name, just a single line. "If you dig further, everything about you will be exposed too." The threat landed hard, but the cowardice behind it was familiar. Someone attached to Marina was scared. I met Elias later at a dim bar in Capitol Hill where the music was low enough to screen secrets. He looked worn, like someone carrying more truth than he could hold. After 2 sips of his drink, he finally said, "There are things you don't know about the way Marina handled Dad's finances. She kept him dependent at the end. Some contracts weren't signed by him, at least not willingly." He pulled a small brass key from his pocket and pushed it toward me. This was his old safe deposit box. "I think he wanted you to have whatever's inside." I opened the box the next morning at a quiet downtown branch. Among a few yellowed papers and a watch Harlan always wore was a small recorder. I pressed play, and his voice, thin but steady, filled the room. He spoke about discrepancies he'd seen in Marina's accounts, about money that disappeared into projects she never explained, and about the clause he insisted I insert into the Langford Rowe contract. "If they ever turn on you," he whispered at the end, "this will protect you. You're the only one I trust to save what matters." Hearing his voice felt like being handed a spine I didn't know I still had. It also confirmed that Marina's actions weren't new, they were woven into the fabric of everything she touched. Jonathan called soon after. They filed a petition claiming your investment wasn't independent, that the funding came from a family loan. They're trying to strip your status as largest investor. The move was desperate but dangerous. If they succeeded, the protective clause would crumble. Then Raina called with something larger than either of us anticipated. The discretionary fund tied to Marina had been mentioned in a closed internal report at the Commerce Commission years ago. It was never pursued, but if connected now, it could trigger a federal inquiry. This is no longer just corporate misconduct, she said. This is criminal exposure. The stakes snapped into a new tier. I knew then I couldn't walk into the launch event as their quiet, agreeable son. I had to walk in with someone who could pull the rug out from under them. So I wrote to Vivian. I'll stand with you at the launch. Prepare everything we discussed. That night alone in my apartment, I stared at the miniature model of Langford Rowe on my table. For years, it had symbolized the future I thought we all shared. Now it was the battleground where truth would land. The launch wasn't going to be a celebration. It would be a reckoning. The afternoon light outside the Hyatt Grand Seattle felt unnaturally bright sharp in a way that made the gold accents of the hotel lobby look cold instead of glamorous. Inside one of the private conference rooms, Vivian's team and I ran through the sequence one last time. The AV staff tested the projection screens with the evidence slides, checking transitions and audio levels. Vivian stood by the window overlooking the city. Her arms crossed, her expression focused, almost surgical. If we're doing this, she said, we do it clean, legal, undeniable. When the truth lands, it needs to land so hard no one can rewrite it. I nodded, feeling the fabric of the dark, tailored suit against my skin. It should have made me feel powerful. Instead, it felt like armor. The scent of polished marble, the distant hum of the ballroom orchestra rehearsing the clinking of glasses outside the hallway. It all felt like a stage constructed for a reckoning instead of a celebration. Guests began arriving long before the official start time. Developers, financial partners, Seattle real estate elites, reporters pretending to be casual while checking equipment. Then, Marina and Cass appeared at the entrance, stepping out of a chauffeured car like they owned the city. Marina's hair was perfectly styled, her gown immaculate, her smile poised but tense around the edges. Cass walked beside her, chin lifted, confident enough to believe she still had control. I watched them from the mezzanine. For years, they had walked into rooms without looking back to see if I was following. Tonight, I would walk into this one on my own terms. When Vivian and I entered the ballroom together, conversation dipped. Heads turned. Some people recognized Vivian immediately, the power behind several of the Northwest's largest developments. Others looked at me with confusion, curiosity, or calculation. Cass's eyes widened. Marina's posture straightened, as if bracing for impact. Marina took the stage first. She spoke of vision, ethics, and family legacy, each word hitting me like a stone skimmed across a surface too thin to hide what lay beneath. I stood by the side of the room, absorbing each rehearsed line. Every mention of unity felt like she was trying to rewrite a past she never intended to honor. Then Cass stepped forward. Her tone was sweeter, more venom wrapped in silk. She implied that I had been misguided, accused me of leveraging the project for personal recognition, and suggested I struggled to understand what it means to be a Hale in spirit. She didn't say the part she always meant, that I wasn't blood, but the audience heard it anyway. My hands tightened at my sides, but I forced myself to stay silent. Timing mattered. The truth needed to hit all at once. Vivian rose from her seat, requesting the microphone. The room quieted the moment she spoke. She introduced herself, then delivered a single sentence that shattered the building confidence on Marina's face. Crest Dominion acquired the entirety of Langford Rowe's outstanding debt this morning. The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Investors exchanged sharp glances. Marina blinked rapidly, her composure slipping for the first time. That can't be possible, she said, her voice rising. Vivian motioned to the AV tech. Let's show them why it became necessary. The screens brightened and my documents filled the room. The forged signatures, the desert front transfers, the Arizona P.O. boxes, every shell company, every trail of vanished money. Gasps rippled through the audience. Marina paled. Cass's jaw clenched so hard her cheek twitched. I walked to the stage. Before taking the microphone, I paused and let myself look out at the entire ballroom. 15 years of being dismissed, diminished, and erased funneled into this single moment. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself not for victory, but for clarity. I told them about the clause 18.4b, the safeguard my father had insisted on. I explained how managing partners discovered violating fiduciary responsibility would automatically transfer their shares to the largest individual investor. Investors murmured louder when I confirmed that investor was me. Cass shook her head in disbelief. Marina stared at me as if I had become someone she no longer recognized. Then I played the recording. Harlan's voice, frail but resolute, filled the space, his suspicions, his attempts to shield the project, his warning about Marina, and his hope that one day I would be strong enough to stand alone. Marina reached for the edge of the podium as if needing support. Cass stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Marina tried to call the recording fabricated. Jonathan stepped forward and calmly stated it had been authenticated by 2 independent analysts. Cass snapped, accusing me of betrayal. I simply looked at her and saw fear for the first time, fear not of me but of the truth she had helped bury. Then one investor stood up and announced that Marina had privately approached them about selling a portion of the project to an overseas fund. The room ignited again. Burying the truth had now become impossible. The ballroom fell into chaos, cameras, flashing chairs, scraping reporters, shouting. And when I finally spoke again, my voice cut cleanly through the noise. Tonight the truth stands with the only person in this room who never wanted to destroy this family but was destroyed by it first. Silence swallowed everything. The night had turned, and nothing about the Hale name would ever be the same again. After the ballroom emptied into a storm of investors and reporters, a private emergency meeting was convened in one of the hotel's upper conference suites. Crest Dominion's attorneys gathered with Jonathan and the lead investor representatives. Marina and Cass were instructed to wait in the hall. The symbolism wasn't subtle, they were no longer part of the decision-making circle. I took the center chair. According to the contract and the newly activated clause, it belonged to me. Jonathan outlined the legal foundation, the automatic transfer of shares, the legitimacy of Harlan's recording, and the forensic evidence proving financial misconduct. The investors listened without objection. They had seen enough in the ballroom to understand who had protected the project and who had endangered it. Marina was called in first. She still carried herself as if she could salvage authority, but the confidence was hollow now. When the investors informed her they were voting to remove her from all positions tied to the project, she tried to appeal to me directly. "Orion, you don't understand what's at stake. You're letting outsiders dismantle our family." Her use of our stung in an old familiar way, but this time I didn't bend. "Family didn't factor you into their plans," I replied. "Just the parts of me they could use." Cass was invited next. She entered with eyes red, mascara smeared, her voice unsteady. "I just need to explain," she whispered. But when I asked whether she had ever considered me real family, she couldn't answer. Her silence was all the truth I needed. I announced my decision calmly. Both Marina and Cass were removed from any authority, any association, any claim on Langford Row. Crest Dominion would assume operational control under my oversight. The project would continue, but without them. The consequences came quickly. Marina faced federal investigation into the discretionary funds. Cass confronted charges of embezzlement. Elias moved out of the family home and apologized more than once. I forgave him, but I didn't let him into the project. Forgiveness wasn't the same as access. A week later, Langford Row's signage was removed. The project was renamed Harbor Light District, a symbol of something rebuilt, something honest. Walking into the new office as its principal stakeholder didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like independence. I allocated $5 million from the restructured partnership funds to establish a scholarship program for youth in the foster system. People asked me why. The answer was simple. I'd once been a kid waiting in a quiet room for someone to choose me. On the final evening of that first week, I stood before the scale model of Harbor Light District in my new office. The Seattle skyline glowed in the windows behind it. My reflection looked different, unburdened, grounded, finally whole. "Family isn't defined by who raised you," I murmured. It's defined by who never walks away when they have the chance.